For Session Daily Update, I'm Chris Carpenter. Tonight at 7 o'clock in the House chamber, Governor TimWalz is expected to give his first State of the State address. As we lead up to the governor's speech, we'd like to present a few interviews that will help set the stage for tonight's address. We asked leaders from both sides of the aisle how they see the state of the state. We also caught up with former House member and now Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, who shared her thoughts on her new role at the Capitol. We also visited with the newest member of the House of Representatives, Representative Nathan Nelson. Up first, an interview with House Majority Leader Ryan Winkler on how he sees the state of the state and what his expectations are for the rest of the 2019 legislative session.
Well, Minnesota's economy is strong. We've had a long period of growth. We have high labor force participation. A lot of people have jobs. Wages are rising. Unemployment is low. But we do have some challenges ahead of us. We have a population that is not growing like it has in the past, and so we have a limited ability to keep the economy growing without new people coming into the workforce or becoming a lot more productive. So when we look down the road and in the future, we are going to look to be a state of slower growth and steady growth unless we take some action to invest more strongly in education, help people stay more attached to the workforce when they have family members or others to care for, and to make sure that this is a state that's welcoming to immigrants. We need more people, and we need people able to stay working in order to keep growing.
And what would you hope to hear from the governor's address tomorrow night?
Well, I hope he does emphasize the importance of education from early learning through K-12 into higher education, that it be affordable and that it be something that is high quality everywhere in the state. I expect that we'll hear a lot about healthcare and the need to keep healthcare costs from continuing to increase and finding ways to do that, and to make sure that as we have an aging population of seniors and we have more people with disabilities, that we are taking care of people over the long term. We have these significant demands on state resources, and it's important that we are honest about the need and do what we can to take care of it.
House DFLers released their proposed Minnesota Values budget last week, which included significant investments in education, healthcare, and in public safety. It's similar to the governor's plan, but Speaker Hortman said the proposal is more aggressive on tax fairness. Can you speak to that?
Well, our tax bill will be revealed on Sunday, but we know that under President Trump and Republicans in Washington, large corporations and very rich individuals received a huge tax cut. In fact, large companies in Minnesota got a bigger tax cut from the Trump tax plan than the total that they pay in taxes in Minnesota. So that big contribution to them has not been the same for working Minnesotans and for the middle class. And so as we look to fund investments in the long term for Minnesota, we think going to corporations and very rich individuals is a fair place to seek revenue.
And how would you describe progress made so far by the DFL-controlled House?
We have had a very ambitious and hard-working legislative session so far. We are passing major legislation in our omnibus bills and as standalones related to paid family and medical leave, earned sick leave, gun violence prevention, a Great Start initiative for early learning. We are focused on mental health and supportive services for kids in schools. We are passing significant improvements in infrastructure related to broadband. We will do funding for clean water. In fact, we already have. And we will be passing a major transportation proposal. So overall, we are ambitious and forward-looking and been willing to do a lot of work to help Minnesota this year.
When session began back in January, there was widespread optimism that the House and Senate would be able to come together on a budget different than they have in the past. Is there still a level of optimism that are you still optimistic that we'll get there?
We always knew that there would be big differences in approach and how we would go after solving these problems. I think we were most optimistic that we had a new group of people here who were ready to work together and try to honestly solve problems, knowing that we wouldn't always agree, but being able to sit down and negotiate in good faith and walk away with respect for each other. And I still think that's the case.
How do you feel about the level of bipartisanship here at the Capitol? Many people would argue that it's lacking at the state level, but certainly at the federal level. What needs to happen at the state level to show Minnesotans that Democrats and Republicans can work together?
Well, first of all, we are the only state legislature in the country divided between Republicans and Democrats. So in order to pass a balanced budget by the end of May, which is what the Constitution requires, we have to work together. And we've done this many times in the past. There have definitely been years when we have not been successful with special sessions and state government shutdowns. And so we've seen bad examples in Minnesota. We've also seen very good examples of being able to work together. And right now I'm optimistic that we will be able to put together a budget that will work for the state of Minnesota, for the people of Minnesota, and do so without the acrimony we've seen in the past.
House Minority Leader Kurt Dowd also spent time with us recently to share his thoughts on the 2019 session and what he'd like to hear from Governor Tim Walz when he appears before the legislature.
Well, I think, generally the state of the state is good, although I have some concerns that our previous governors' huge tax increases are starting to come home to roost, if you will. We've seen a loss of revenue of about $500 million from November of 2018 to February of 2019. And it appears that for the most part, is high-income earners now leaving the state of Minnesota. And that is concerning. Once those people leave, they certainly aren't going to come back. And unfortunately, we don't have someone at the border clocking that revenue out, and then we reduce our expenditures to make up for that. So what happens is we still have the same level of expenditures, and it just leaves the rest of us who are still here holding the bag. It looks now like we have a projected deficit in the tails in the next biennium, which is very concerning. Ultimately, it's going to be interesting to see how this legislative session responds to that in what I would look for to be a responsible way.
And what would you hope to hear from Governor Walz when he addresses the legislature April 3rd?
Well, unfortunately, his initial budget proposal, I think, was more based on his experience in Washington and less based on his experience here in St. Paul. I think that our new governor hasn't yet figured out how St. Paul works, and we have a balanced budget requirement here, which he has never worked with in Washington, D.C. Before. I also think his budget proposal isn't very realistic given our current scenario here in Minnesota. He's proposing a $3.4 billion tax increase on Minnesotans at a time when we have $1 billion surplus forecast for the next biennium. So I think that's a little bit out of touch with where Minnesotans are. We're also one of the highest tax states in the country, depending on how you look at it, somewhere around the fourth highest tax state in the country. And if it's that high tax, high regulatory environment that's driving Minnesotans out of the state, and they're taking their revenue with them, increasing taxes further is only going to exacerbate the problem and make the problem worse. So we really need to take a good look at what's the right policy thing to do here, and put that in place, or we're going to be certainly headed for a deficit.
So let's say Governor Walz emphasizes what he's been talking about all along. To get to a one Minnesota, more revenue needs to be created, including the gas tax increase, universal health care. How does that play out the last 7 or 8 weeks?
Well, unfortunately, his version of what he thinks one Minnesota is actually not one Minnesota. I think he would be leaving most Minnesotans behind, and he would be driving our state into a deficit. Everybody ran in this last election cycle on wanting to reduce the cost of health care. His proposals will increase the cost of health care on every Minnesotan. And that, to me, is a direct broken promise to Minnesotans. And it's the wrong approach. I think what Minnesotans are looking for is real leadership on how to give them more choices in their health care, but do it at a way that provides them with some options that cost less. And we know that a government-run solution, a single-payer, universal health care system, other states have looked at it, they've started to move in that direction, and then they turn around once they realize how expensive it is. You literally would have to increase almost double our state's general fund budget to do that. And if you look at how much revenue it would take to do that, you'd have to basically increase taxes, every tax, every fee on every Minnesotan that's collected by state government by about 80%. I think we can take that off the table. That's not realistic. I keep repeating this. It seems incredibly obvious, but you don't decrease the cost of healthcare by increasing the cost of healthcare. And that's what this governor needs to understand. Let's actually put our heads around the problem and start figuring out ways to reduce the cost of healthcare. That's what Minnesotans expect us to do.
How would you describe the state of bipartisanship around here at the legislature right now? What do Republicans and Democrats need to do to work together?
You know, I think generally people are ready and willing to work together. I think that the nature of our legislative sessions are that we spend a majority of the time at the beginning of the legislative sessions kind of back in our corners, talking to people about why our ideas are the best, and we spend a very little bit of time at the end of session meshing our ideas with those on the other side of the aisle to come up with ultimately what the right solutions are. So we could spend more time, negotiating out the differences between our ideas and those on the other side of the aisle at the end of session, and a little less time, retracted in our corners trying to convince our base why our ideas are the best. However, I think Minnesotans appreciate a good debate on issues. And frankly, we as Republicans in the state want to hold Democrats accountable to what they told the voters in the last election. That includes Governor Walz. You know, Governor Walz has said numerous times that he thinks he has a mandate by voters, but I'll remind him that his mandate was to reduce the cost of health care. And right out of the chute now, he's got multiple proposals that would increase the cost of health care to proportions that would make it really unaffordable for a lot of Minnesotans. And that will reduce access and reduce the care that Minnesotans are getting. And that's the wrong approach.
How does your caucus feel about some of the DFL initiatives making their way through the House? 2 gun bills, paid family leave, Minnesota Care buy-in option.
Well, I think unfortunately they are ideological solutions that the Democrats are wedded to that really don't solve the problems that they're intended to solve. And that's one of the problems with St. Paul and the way that we work here is, and I have always long advocated for, let's figure out what the problem is. Let's start with that, wrap our minds around it, and always keep that in mind as we try to figure out how to put a solution in place that's going to be best for Minnesotans. Instead, we come, and you see it right now with what the Democrats are putting through the legislative sessions, or proposing in their legislation. They come with ideological solutions and then try to convince everybody that those are the solutions to the problem that's at hand. A good example of that would be a universal health care. The gun bills are another great example of that. They really aren't going to solve the problem, and they're really targeted at the wrong people. The universal health care, again, we don't provide people with more choice, more access at a lower cost. By going to a universal healthcare system where there's only there's no options, there's just one provider, and then frankly, the cost would be so prohibitively expensive that it would basically bankrupt the state of Minnesota. That's not the kind of solution. While yes, it'll drive all of the health insurance companies out of business, and it'll drive most rural hospitals and healthcare providers out of business. That's not the sort of solution I think most Minnesotans think is acceptable. However, it is ideologically what the Democrats and their base want, and they need to come to terms with, I think getting realistic with actually helping Minnesotans and solving the problem, because their ideas are just out of touch with what I think will work and what Minnesotans expect.
So we're not too far away from the end of the session, but when we finally get there, you're back home talking to constituents.
2 months? A little less than 2 months now,
we're,
right?
we're getting close, though.
Yeah.
How will you end up summarizing the 2019 legislative session?
Well, I obviously can't do that until the end, but I hope that we can come together and put some solutions in place that actually will help Minnesotans. At this point, it looks like the sides are far enough apart that this might be a status quo kind of session, where we just simply cover the basics and there's not a lot of additional. However, we did some really great stuff over the last couple of years. For instance, we basically solved the road and bridge funding crisis and put enough money in, as long as we continue with the level of bonding for our road and bridge infrastructure that we have over the last couple of years. If we continue that and the money that we put in from the auto parts sales tax into roads and bridges, if Governor Walz doesn't steal that back out and use it for other things, which is what his proposal is, actually taking money away from roads and bridges, if he doesn't do that, that's something that we can call a victory, that we have solved, and we can move on and work on other things. So I think that the deficit that's pending in the tails, even though it's a small deficit, I think it's 20 million or just under that in the the next biennium is what we're budgeting for, but in the following biennium, I think that's concerning, and it limits the ability to put in place long-term increases in program funding. But we also believe very strongly that there is enough money in our current system. We believe there's probably $500 million at DHS of fraud, waste, abuse, low-hanging fruit. An example of that, we put in place passed into law 4 years ago, something called periodic data matching, where we basically take a database of, maybe it could be income tax returns. So we look at how much you told us you make on your income tax return. We compare that to how much you told us you make on your welfare application or your application for medical assistance. And if the two don't match up, you're defrauding the state, right? Somebody that makes $100,000 a year may not qualify for a public program. We throw those people off, and the nonpartisan legislative auditor thinks there's $200 million of savings there. That's real money that's ongoing into the future, and it could be even more than that. The CCAP, the Child Care Assistance Program dollars, there's been numbers as high as $100 million or more discussed as fraud in that program. If we can use those dollars and more effective, find them, reduce the waste, fraud, and abuse, and then reallocate those dollars to other programs, maybe increase in school funding, those sorts of things, we have the dollars necessary to operate the state and to give the moderate increases that folks would expect in our important programs. We don't need to increase taxes on Minnesotans, and if we continue to increase taxes on already what are some of the highest taxed folks in the country, we're going to continue to have the problems that we have where people are leaving the state and we lose revenue.
Last year at this time, Peggy Flanagan was in the middle of the 2018 session representing House District 46A. Today, Flanagan will be back in the House chamber, but this time as Lieutenant Governor. We had a chance to visit with her about the transition to her new position and what Minnesotans should expect to hear from the governor.
Well, the last year has certainly been an intense one, but it's been a lot of fun too. I miss my colleagues in the House, but I'm really honored to be able to do this work and to bring that perspective as a House member into the executive branch and the office of Lieutenant Governor, which is, I think, helping to help us figure out strategy and how to best move forward.
What's it like working with Governor Walz?
It's really fun. We are partners and a team, and I think you can see that in the way that we work together. The governor and I decided to run very early on together because we know that we both have different life experiences that complement one another. So we work side by side in hiring 23 commissioners. We work side by side in putting together our budget and really complement one another. It is interesting work, it's intense work, but we are definitely having a good time, and I think that you can see that camaraderie as we're in our first 100 days of working together.
His first State of the State address coming up on Wednesday.
Yeah.
What should Minnesotans expect to hear that night?
Well, I think Minnesotans should expect to hear about this vision that we've laid out for One Minnesota that was informed by conversations that we had with Minnesotans all across the state. After we were elected, we hit the road. And when we put together our budget, we hit the road and we got feedback. And that's part of that's the best part of this job, is having conversations with Minnesotans. So I think that they will see their thoughts, their feedback reflected in the conversation that I think Governor Walz will be having with the state of Minnesota, and really focusing on education and healthcare and making sure that we have communities across the state that prosper.
Roughly 7 weeks left in the session. What are your hopes, or how do you see it playing out when May comes, end of May?
Well, I think end of May is always a really exciting time here at the Capitol. But my hopes are that people are at the center of all of these conversations, and knowing that children and families are really being lifted up by the executive branch, but also the House and Senate. We try to look at this work through the lens of making sure that no matter who you are, where you live, your zip code, race or ethnicity, that you really have an opportunity to thrive. And my hope is that we all enter into these conversations at the end of session with that spirit together. I know that things oftentimes get a little heated and a little intense, but I know that we all have really the best interest of all Minnesotans in mind, and that's what we fully expect and hope to do as we move towards the end of session.
And final question before we let you go, I had to ask you about this. It's kind of more of an FYI.
Yeah.
Wanted to let you know that our most downloaded, most watched video was you singing on the House floor, Purple Rain, with Mike Freiberg on the keys a little bit. He did a good job. Do people still ask you about that, or
Yes.
did anybody ever ask you? What was that like? If you could just give us a quick, because I don't think anybody's ever done that, and probably
sure.
won't after since.
Well, it was. I think it was a really beautiful moment within the House. We changed the rules for a moment that evening. And folks came together, and I'd like to bring up, right, then we've got red and we've got blue, and when you put those together, you get purple. And so it was totally appropriate and a way to honor someone who really is an icon, and someone who I think that folks, no matter who you are or where you come from, just really adored Prince, and he was ours. So I didn't know that was the most
it is the most watched by
video.
far. We hang our hat on that. We invite people to check it out. So.
I appreciate that. I was actually just meeting with a group of young Native people, and they were like, "Hey, you sang Purple Rain on the House floor," and I was like, I appreciate being known for that, and I also hope that I will be known for the good work that Governor Walz and I do on behalf of Minnesotans.
Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Before we go to the floor for coverage of the House floor session, the joint convention of the House and Senate, and then Governor Tim Walz's 7 p.m. State of the State address, we'd like to introduce you to the newest member of the House. Representative Nathan Nelson won a March 19th special election in District 11B and was sworn into office last week.
It's thinking back to November, casting the ballot for Jason Rarick and our senator, or I guess the Senate wasn't up for election, but it was just I was really proud of Jason. He's done a lot of work. He's done a lot of great things in our community, and he was somebody that I really kind of like. I aspire to be like him in many ways. Bringing, meeting the needs of the community. Bringing people together, and it was something that was great to be able to cast that ballot. And having recently sold my dairy herd, I had a whole list of things I was really planning to do this winter. Some work in the shop and some of those things. And we finished up harvest, went through Christmas, and I really just enjoyed the time with the family. And January 3rd, I believe it was, there was the announcement that then Senator Tony Laurie was going to be moving to a commissioner position. And my wife had said that to me, and she says my face just lit up. And I did make a couple of phone calls that evening, and talked to a few individuals, because knowing that there would be an open seat in a special election, and hearing that Jason was running, I had a little bit of interest in the Senate seat, but hearing that Jason was running, I said, Jason is going to be, he's got a name recognition, he's got some experience. I think he's going to be a lot better position and a lot better probability of being able to be elected. So, over the next month or so of January, I was kind of starting to think more of I'm considering running, and it gave me a little bit more time to ponder of this decision. And, it was kind of becoming a little bit more and more real of, seeing Jason gaining some more traction in the Senate race. And it really became if Jason wins, I'm going to announce. And, it was something that, my kids were excited about it. My wife was excited about it. And there's a lot of things that I kind of have to sell my wife on an idea of, if we're going to change something on the farm. I've got to, we're business partners. Usually I'm the one that's got everything kind of rolling in my head and an idea that I want to try. And I've got to sell her on it. And, and this is something that I didn't have to sell her on. I mean, she was just like, I'm supporting you in this. And and that was really, from day one, she said when she saw my face light up January 3rd, that she said, she's like, I think my life just turned upside down. And, but she's been very supportive of it, the whole time. And it's been a very, very kind of neat thing for our family as we go through this. And so, as the election comes around and the special election, Jason gets moved to the Senate and opens the House seat up, and it's just from February 5th. There was a almost 2-week window until the endorsing convention on the February 19th, and so I was calling delegates, trying to get support, and kind of learning all of what Campaign 101 is, and actually probably not even 101, or probably at the graduate level of it at that point.
What were some of the issues that were important to your constituents? So what is District 11B like?
The District 11B, there's, agriculture is a large part of our industry. As farms are growing larger, so there's getting to be less and less numbers that are directly involved in agriculture, but it's still important to our district. And there's a lot of other small businesses or people that work for small businesses. So one of the things I was hearing over and over is healthcare. Many of the businesses are small enough that they don't provide it for their employees, so they're on the open market. And it's something that, it's cost us a lot of funds in rural Minnesota. And our options are maybe a little bit more limited, and so over and over we heard about healthcare and how the costs have gotten just out of hand. Whether it's prescription drugs, just the health insurance in general, and people want some very meaningful action taken on that, and to be able to get cost under control. Another thing we heard quite a bit was property taxes, and whether it's school referendums, for their buildings, or, I think there's a lot of people that feel that property taxes are out of line for where they should be. And so that's something that's important. And probably the next top issue would be the gas tax. That was when the news was coming out about the proposed 20-cent gas tax. And, in rural Minnesota, we don't have a whole lot of options of what to do, whether we're going to take a bus or drive ourselves. We don't really have that option. So we drive a lot. It's just a necessity of living where we do. And it's a great place to live, but at the same time, there's not a lot of options we do have. So it would hurt us. It would cost a lot of, there's people that are already, to the end of on their fixed incomes, and to add another $300 to $400 a year in tax, that would really hurt. And so that was one of the big issues that we heard about.
House Republican leader Kurt Daudt has said that you'll be a welcome new voice for lower taxes and strong rural economies. Is he right?
Yes, it's something that I think that we need to be able to use responsible spending. I think that we're either fourth or fifth our state on our taxes, and I think it isn't that we've got a tax problem, it's that we've got a spending problem. And I think that we need to better manage where our tax dollars are going. I think that there's areas that we can work with. One of the things that growing up on a farm, we have to constantly work to the markets and see, because it's, we've got a commodity, or beef cattle or corn or soybeans that when we plant that seed, from the time we sell it, the market may change drastically. And so we've got to be constantly flexible. And so there's a lot of times where we've got to tighten our belt and really hunker down and be very frugal with what we're doing to be able to. And I think that's something that maybe isn't always happening at the state. And I believe that we can better manage our spending and do it without raising our taxes. I think we really should be able to cut some taxes and be able to still provide the services that we're doing and do it more affordably.
The House is expected to reconvene in a few moments and will later be joined by Senate members in a joint convention for Governor Tim Walz's first State of the State address, scheduled for 7 p.m. For a recap of the governor's address, check out our nonpartisan session daily coverage on the House website, www.house.mn/sessiondaily. We now go to the floor for the start of this evening's House floor session.
The House will come to order. The chair recognizes the Sergeant at Arms.
I have the honor to announce the arrival of the members of the Senate of the state of Minnesota.
Members, please stand. The Sergeant at Arms will escort the members of the Senate to the front of the chamber. The joint convention will come to order. Prayer by the chaplains.
Let us pray. God, our Creator, we all, by your decree, are united in one Minnesota in caring for our neighbors.
We all, by your mercy, are united in one Minnesota in caring for our elders and parents whose work left us a better Minnesota.
And now it is our responsibility to sow the seeds of redemption for our children and our grandchildren to ensure the future for one Minnesota.
God of heaven and earth, bless those called to lead, Governor Walz, those in the House and Senate, the Supreme and other courts, and the many working behind the scenes.
ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا. Our Lord, grant us mercy from yourself and arrange our affairs for us correctly.
V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha. May we bless one another as we love our neighbors as ourselves.
God, many of our people are hungry. May we feed them.
God, many of our people are without housing. May we shelter them.
God, many of our people are without health care. May we heal them.
As we love our neighbors, God, cause us to feel their need as we feel our own need.
God, we pray to you, enable us to care for your creation, our fellow humans, our fellow Minnesotans.
As we now hear the state of the state, may we be mindful of the state of her citizens, the state of her families, and the state of where our hearts and souls reside today.
These we ask you in all your good names. Amen.
The chaplains for the Joint Convention are Bishop Patricia Lull, Imam Asad Zaman, and Rabbi Marcia Zimmerman. You may be seated. The Secretary will call the roll.
Abler. Anderson B. Anderson P. Bach.
I recognize Senator Gazelka.
Madam Speaker, I move that further proceedings of the roll call be dispensed with.
Senator Gazelka moves that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The motion prevails.
A quorum is present.
A quorum is present.
Madam President,
The chair recognizes the Sergeant at Arms.
I have the honor to announce the arrival of the Honorable Lori Sherman-Gilday, Chief Justice, and the Honorable members of the Supreme Court, and the Honorable Edward J. Cleary, Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals.
Will you please stand? The Sergeant at Arms will escort the Chief Justice, the members of the Supreme Court, and the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals to the front of the chamber. You may be seated.
Okay, where are they?
The chair recognizes the Sergeant at Arms.
I have the honor to announce the arrival of the constitutional officers of the state of Minnesota. The Honorable Steve Simon, Secretary of State. The Honorable Julie Blaha, State Auditor. And the Honorable Keith Ellison, Attorney General.
Will you please stand? The Sergeant at Arms will escort the constitutional officers to the front of the chamber. You may be seated.
Like
Madam President,
The chair recognizes the Sergeant at Arms.
I have the honor to announce the arrival of the Honorable Mark Dayton, former governor of the state of Minnesota.
Will you please stand? The Sergeant at Arms will escort the former governor to the front of the chamber.
Madam President,
The chair recognizes the Sergeant at Arms.
I have the honor to announce the arrival of the Honorable Peggy Flanagan, Lieutenant Governor of the state of Minnesota.
Will you please stand? The Sergeant at Arms will escort the Lieutenant Governor to the front of the chamber.
time no see.
You may be seated.
Pretty nice. Cute. I love it.
Madam President,
The chair recognizes the Sergeant at Arms.
I have the honor to announce the arrival of the Honorable Tim Walz, Governor of the State of Minnesota, and his official party.
Will you please stand? The Sergeant at Arms will escort the Governor and his official party to the front of the chamber.
my guardsmen. Thank you. Thank you.
You may be seated. Members of the Joint Convention and guests, I present to you the Governor of the State of Minnesota, the Honorable Tim Walz.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you. Madam Speaker and members of the Minnesota House of Representatives, Mr. President and members of the Minnesota Senate, Madam Chief Justice and distinguished members of the Minnesota Supreme Court, my fellow constitutional officers, my cabinet, staff, Governor Dayton, to our sovereign leadership of our indigenous nations, Lower Sioux Vice President Grace Goldtooth, Prairie Island Indian Community President Shelley Buck, and Boys Fort Band of Chippewa Chairwoman Kathy Shavers, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan of the White Earth Nation, escorts in the Minnesota National Guard, some of whom are with the Field Artillery, the 1 of the 125, Steel Rain, and to the First Lady, Gwen, my daughter Hope, my son Gus, who is absent as a 12-year-old with pink eye, and my fellow Minnesotans, who serve as the foundation of this great state and the reason we're here tonight. Tonight, gathering together for the first time, all of us together, gives us an opportunity to reaffirm why we are here. I know for certain that we're not here to have petty arguments against one another. I'm absolutely certain we're not here to send out mean tweets towards one another. And I know, and I think this is especially true of our new members, we're not here to be actors in a story that is already written for us, one that tells us how we're supposed to act, and this is the way it's always been done. And we're supposed to butt heads on this, and then May 20th will come around, and we will become friends. I am not naive, my friends. I served in the House of Representatives. I believe there's one other person in this room who has had the pleasure of serving both in the United States Congress and being here with the Attorney General. I will tell you, don't write that story. Write this story right here. That's why you came here. That is why you worked so hard to come and bring your talents and bring your experience, and more importantly, to bring the stories of your constituents. That's what this is really about. Those stories that inform who we are. The policy proposals that we put forward, those are not something that comes from us as our personal ideology. They are things that come from our constituents in the stories they tell us about their lives. Whether they tell us about health care and what they need or what could be done, or they talk about education and it's working and what's not, or they talk about what makes Minnesota such a special place. Tonight I'm going to tell you a few of those stories. You'll recognize some of them because the name might be different, but it'll be the same story you're hearing. Some of them you won't know. Some come from friends, some come from people who told me the story since I have become governor, and like so many of you sometimes, you just step back when you hear the story and you think, that needs to be retold and something needs to be done. And tonight, I've got a lot of stories, mainly because I spent many, many years teaching and I taught thousands of students, 2 of whom are with us tonight. Will and Ross are here with me tonight. They're twins, if you can't tell. I never could tell you apart. It was the dirty shoes were the giveaway. Will and Ross were students of mine at Mankato West, and like tens of thousands across Minnesota, they came to our schools eager. They wanted to absorb everything. They took advantage of every opportunity and every club we had, and they wanted to find out what life could give them. They went out and furthered their education, and they decided they would pursue the 2 things that they were really, really excited about: athletics and sport, and eating. And they came together, and got 3 of their other friends, and since they're very literal people, they created a little company called 5 Friends, so it made sense. And they decided that nutrition and granola bars were too expensive, and they weren't made with a lot of natural ingredients. So the 5 friends, who had everything from marketing degrees to sports science degrees, came together, crafted, started cooking granola bars, and they will admit the first ones were terrible. You guys have told me that. And stuck with it, and finally got a store to carry them. Then they got the second store. Then they got the 100th store. Then they got the 600th store. That's the dream that Minnesotans want, an opportunity to get the background and go forward to create the life you want. When I asked them what drove that, what made the difference, and they didn't blink. They said it was the teachers who had each of us believing that we could do anything we wanted to. That experience they had in that classroom and with those teachers and after school in those clubs inspired them to be the best they can. That's what we ask. That's what we want of every single one of our schools and our teachers. But unfortunately, it's not true across the state. All too often, that success or that opportunity might be dictated by a zip code, or it might be dictated by race. We've got a teacher here with me tonight. Amanda Field is here from Floodwood. Amanda is one of those people that we need in the classroom. Amanda grew up and went to Floodwood schools. Some of you are familiar in here. I know there's some folks here know Floodwood in St. Louis County, that they know where it's at. Floodwood's a town of about 525. Amanda and I were who had the smaller classing each other before this. She graduated with 38 students in her class. I had 24 in mine, 12 of whom were cousins. But I would not change that experience for anything. The ability and the teachers that I had influenced me in a profound way. They influenced Amanda enough, she went off and got her teaching degree and went back to Floodwood to teach. But here's the problem. As Floodwood's demographics changed a little bit, the property tax base isn't big enough. And as Minnesota started to shift away from funding in the state formula to property taxes, it left communities like Floodwood, they'll go to a ballot next Tuesday. And they've made it very clear. If their referendum fails, they will consolidate classes, close programs, and lay off a quarter of their teachers. They have no other option. Those are where we were putting people into those positions. What that does, it stops the opportunity that Will and Ross were given. It makes a difference based on geography for the outcomes we're going to get. It weakens our economic strength across the state, and we have the capacity to do something about it. That's the reason when we talk about education funding, it's not a game, it's not numbers. Local school boards have informed us about the decisions they need. I'm asking, and when we put a budget together, yes, it's a fiscal document, but it's a moral document. And what these schools have said is they need to get 3 and 2% on their funding formula. We can debate that, and we will, healthy. But keep in mind, behind every one of the debates we have here are real people being impacted by them, real people. Now, I want to be clear. We need to be smart on how we do this. We need to be creative on how we do it. And we need to stop seeing, as the Lieutenant Governor so often says, and my next guest who's with me, Dr. Nathan Chomelo is with us in the audience tonight. Dr. Chomelo is a pediatrician and an internist, and he has the same saying that the Lieutenant Governor always says to me: children do not come in pieces. He has spent his lifetime providing care as a pediatrician, preventative care for those students, for those patients. But he didn't see them just as patients. He also has a program where he gives a book to every single one of his patients, because what he understands is that whole child, if they get to a good start where they have their opportunities to get their checkups, but they're there in a place with someone and a professional that ties everything together. If that child is healthy physically and mentally, if that child is ready for kindergarten, if that child has a home, a safe home to put their head on the pillow at night, the chances of success in that classroom and going on and accomplishing what students do across this state increase greatly. Dr. Chomelo knows most of the children he sees in his practice are dependent on the Health Care Access Fund. So I come to you not with that I think it's not my idea. I would like to claim credit for what Minnesota did. Nearly 3 decades ago, we said it makes sense to get our children care before they get sick. It makes sense to put them into that place. And it is not by chance that because of what they did, and that was Republican and DFL and Reform Party governor and everyone in this room, some of you sitting here remember this, they crafted a system that not only provided and insured more people than any other state, our health outcomes rocketed to the top. What that does is provides the opportunity for that child for a good start. It saves us money, and it makes the sense that we know we can start moving in a direction where every single person, not just every child, has those same opportunities. So when I come to you and ask you, it's not to pick a fight. It's not because I believe that I have cornered the market on the Healthcare Access Fund. I believe that it is the best solution that was out there, and it gives us a foundation to work from there. And the reason And let me be clear, the respect I have, and I want to be absolutely clear about this, I know that every single person in this chamber wants every child to get that care. They want the outcome that Dr. Chimelo is getting to happen for every child. The difference might be in the approach that we go about it. What I am asking you, though, is let us have this open debate about a 27-year-old program that is foundational to the healthcare of this state. It has survived countless administrations, countless members who have sat where you've sat, come and gone, and has still continued to deliver. And if we get to that, then we can move forward about how do we talk about retaining and making sure that we keep costs down. We make sure that care is available in all of our communities, and we move forward to a better system. Because I am here to tell you, don't wait for a minute with a partner who is unreliable. The federal government has added more certainty, and we were told today that there will be no movement on health care till after the 2020 election. And the reason that that is a problem is my next guest will tell you we don't have till 2021. Deborah Mills is with me tonight up in the audience. And Deborah, I just recently met. Deborah is a dairy farmer from Lake City. I don't think she would have ever imagined being in this space or being thrust into this debate. Her family is the quintessential American and Minnesota dairy farmers. 3 generations on the farm. They have about 280 head they milk. They raise corn for silage. Their daughter Maggie was a finalist for Princess K of the Milky Way. This is just what Minnesota, yeah. It's just what people do. And this is not about ascribing blame. This is about outcomes that matter. Because of the way the system worked, and Deborah's playing by the rules, she does not have access to health care. So she has the stress of going without health care. Couple that with historically low milk prices. Couple that with catastrophic weather events that had Deborah to a point. And those of you in here, I know many of you grew up on farms, you work on farms, you know agriculture, you come from different parts of different walks of life. But the one thing is, this is a proud family who works hard and prides themselves not just on working hard, but being tough. And then a day came a short time ago where Deborah knew she needed to make a really tough decision. And I can tell you the decision she made took courage beyond what you could only imagine. She picked up the phone and she called a mental health counselor and said, I am at wit's end. What do I do? And the good news is there was somebody to pick up the phone. The good news was there was a plan to put in place. And Deborah started to come back from that. Now, again, I will leave it to this body and for us to debate where we're going to get to. But I think we could stand in agreement that all of our citizens should have the basic safety net, the basic security that comes with having access to health care so you don't get into a mental health crisis. We can agree on that. I promise you I've got a story that will get you on your feet by the end of this. I've got enough of them here. I'll keep arming them. I got enough of them. But I do want to be clear. I do not take that in any way as a judgment to the care and the empathy that you show and everyone in here shows to Deborah's family, because we can get this right. We have to. And I have to tell you, I believe it will be in this body. The story that we are telling here, we need to tell it differently. Because if we go down the road and write the same story that's been written in Washington, we will get the same results. Everybody has talked about one state with divided government. Can one state rise up? I don't know about any of you. I told you you did not come here to be an actor in someone else's script. Let's write the new script. Let's write the new way this ends. Let's respect one another where it comes from. Because if you're sitting here and you're so cynical that it will end in the same place, look at what that does. Where do we go from there? And that includes me to ask the questions of what am I willing to do to try and find that? And the answer is to try and use our best ability and the facts available and the empathy that is central to the decision making you make in here to ensure that that child gets off to a good start, that those students have the opportunity to learn, and that that family has the opportunity to make it on the land where they've been for over 100 years. That's what we know. I'm trying hard. But here's the good news. None of us are in it alone together. There's community leaders all across this state. There's great ideas out there. I think most of us come here with a sense of humility. Not all the best ideas are going to come out of this place, and they're not going to come out down on Summit Avenue. They're going to come out of Minnesotans. That's why the stories that matter. We've seen this leadership out there, and I've got one that I've really come to depend on, and I know many of you as legislators come to depend on, and that's our local elected officials. I've got Mayor Ben Shire of Fergus Falls here tonight with me, right up here. And Mayor Shire, first of all, he's the owner of a brew pub and a wood-fire pizza place in Fergus Falls, right on Main Street. Yes. I'm just going to, I recommend the Thai peanut. So the pizza, not the beer, the pizza one. So you know where it's at. But Mayor Shire understands. He can't debate these things. These are real issues that impact that. The street lights have to be kept on. They need to be plowed. You need to have decisions about the pool. You need to talk about how do we keep businesses and how do we partner together. These mayors come with a very nonpartisan approach because they have to get results. They do not have the luxury of holding on to a tight ideological position and say, I'm one of many. They are the mayor of their community, and the prosperity of that community depends upon them. So having a mayor, and I know many of you know this, funny how so many of them are so actively engaged in their community before they took that job. The first thing Mayor Shire had me do after I was elected is come out to Fergus Falls on a cold November night last year and sit in a town hall that went about 2.5 hours and hear the hopes and dreams and fears and critiques of the people in Fergus Falls, and said, listen to this. Listen to them. Listen to their stories. And after I was done, a gentleman came up and he said, Tim, I did not vote for you, and I do not agree with many, if any, of your positions. But it is apparent to me that just like me, this is what he said, that you love Minnesota just as much. And we are going to have to find a way forward. I do not want you to fail because Minnesota will fail. Here's what I'm telling all of you. I do not want a single one of us in this building to fail because that means Minnesota fails. And that gentleman knew it. Thank you. And this is a place, and you can feel it. This is the sense of pride we come here to make a difference. So when we're putting out proposals, and I say this about community prosperity very clearly, the community prosperity piece that I'm putting out is to talk about local government aid, to talk about some of the things we can do on broadband of working together, to put the tools back in the hands of Mayor Ben. or Mayor Roy in Waseca, or Mayor Peterson in Winona across there, to allow local decisions to make a difference in people's lives. Because we know that leadership and those ideas are out there, but we have to be good partners. And that holds true with leaders who don't hold elected position. And my next guest tonight, some of you may be familiar with, because this is what leadership and community activity starts to look like. My next guest is Houston White. Those of you who don't know Houston, and Houston, in this moment, I share my deepest sympathies on your loss of Donice, and you and I have not spoken much since then. But the one thing I can tell you, Houston owns a barbershop in North Minneapolis. He's a renowned clothing designer with his own retail store there, got a small restaurant, coffee shop. I'm convinced if I bring my car there, he can repair it, and that's it. But he's got a vision, and he's got an enthusiasm and an entrepreneur spirit that is contagious. And he talks about ways that we can revitalize our communities. This is a man who went to school at North High School. And he remembers walking down the street with his backpack, and someone stopped him and said, "What's in your backpack?" He said, "I got a business in my backpack, sir." And he did. He was out selling and working, and an entrepreneur that went into it. And he has a vision of making that Camden Town area of where he's at a vibrant community where people can come to live and create their jobs. And that's where we partnered together. Houston knows that's the strength of community prosperity. The mayors of these communities know that they're looking for a reliable partner in us. And I would ask us, let's be that reliable partner. Let's don't model and wait on the unreliable partner we have in the federal government. But what Houston knows is the community he's trying to make, we must make sure that the employees coming to him and the people there are able to bring them best selves. That means that this state needs to and has to tackle issues of inequity, whether they be geographic inequities or racial inequities. We have got to tackle the idea that people need affordable housing, that people need childcare so that they can go to work. Those are things that are universal amongst us. And if we partner and lay the foundation, the mayors and the entrepreneurs like Ben in Houston will take it and run. So. Now, the stories we're telling are the story of us, the story of Minnesota, and they're the stories of communities. It's not by mistake that the proposals and the policy proposals and the budget proposals that I put in front of you center around some pretty clear themes, because that's what came to me from people. We want to have health care, we want good education, and we want our communities to prosper. And the stories behind the people. And I say this because I have been blessed. My wife and I have our first house that we ever bought in Mankato, on the west side of Mankato. And like so many of you, my dearest friends that became family were my neighbors, where they butt up against them. Either they become your best friends or you build a fence. And in our case, we were best friends. And this is my neighbors, the Ingmans. Mary Ingman, her two sons, Ben and Jake are here tonight. Their wonderful sister Katie we'll get her back from Washington State, are with me tonight. We have shared countless 4th of Julys, birthdays, refinishing my floors in my house when I would recruit the boys. The same thing all neighbors do, that this is how communities are built. And I had the privilege of not only teaching Mary's children, I had the privilege of coaching Ben. And I remember it very clearly. It was a Friday in December, headed towards the holidays, back in 1996. And I was coaching middle school basketball. And I was downtown at the old Mankato Armory. And we were in that floor, and it was after school, and it was right before Christmas break, and it's a bunch of 12 and 13-year-old boys, and we had a tournament coming up. And it's the excitement, it's the fun, it's life. The life is potential. And in walked in 2 state troopers with Mary. And she'd obviously been crying. And it was at that point that Ben found out and we found out that her husband, Charlie, had been hit head on Highway 14 and killed with 3 young children. That same highway has killed 145 people in the last 3 decades. It is the most dangerous in Minnesota. And so I say this with candid and bearing my heart to you, because each and every one of you, whether you live in Delano or whether you live in Mankato, you know stories of this happening. So my passion is not to pick a fight with you about transportation. My passion is to make sure that what the results say when we've got D-rated roads, that we do something together. And I will gladly have the debate with you and a compromise to find how we do that. But here's what I'm telling you. In the 23 years since Charlie has died, that is still a 2-lane dangerous road, and the time has passed to fix them. We can do that. So we can do that. So I know amongst the challenges, and again, I remind many of you this. Yes, I am a hopeless optimist, but as I tell many of you, I'm also a realist. I supervised the lunchroom for 20 years. I am not naive. I do not expect, and as my wife Gwen says, and we believe so strongly in this, hope is the most powerful word in the universe. We named our daughter Hope. But as my wife says, and I know is true, hope is not a plan. You have to plan, not just hope that things get better. And all of us in here have to plan if we want to write a different story. The outcome will remain the same if we do not. And I say this to you because I take very, very seriously, and I think all of us see this, the incredible privilege it is to self-govern as free men and women. Literally billions of people around the world can only imagine of sitting where you are and making decisions, and your constituents being able to come here. But let's all be very, very clear. That privilege was paid for with the blood of patriots. It was paid for in sacrifice to get there. Tonight, we have one of them amongst us. World War II veteran Gordy Kirk is with us tonight. Gordy served with the 3rd Army, the 4th Armored Division, Patton's Vanguard. He landed at Normandy, and he fought across Europe from 43 to 45. He did that while knowing that when he returned home, he could not sit at the same counter and eat the same food as someone next to him. But what Gordy did was come back to his community and say, I'm going to be the change. Because what he knew was, on those beaches of Normandy, that was the purest form of democracy. No one in there questioned where someone came from. No one questioned the color of skin. No one questioned their religion. They only knew they stood together in the face of tyranny. So Gordy came back, became the state commander of the VFW, changed how we deliver veterans benefits across the state, and continued to build in his community. He gave us the gift and modeled it for the way we need to treat each other. So I hold myself to that standard tonight. And if I fall down, I expect to be called on it, of treating our differences with respect. And treating these debates with respect, but with an understanding. We cannot allow ideology to get in the way of educating our children for Will, for Ross, and for Amanda teaching. We cannot let ideology get in the way of stopping this state from providing basic health care to all of its citizens. We cannot let ideology get in the way of holding back our mayors and our entrepreneurs of getting things done. And we cannot let ideology get in the way of making sure that no one else has to go through what the Ingman family did. And when I look out my back window and I see those grandkids, my heart breaks for thinking that Charlie didn't get to see that. So here we go. What are we going to do now? There's already people who've written us off. You've seen the stories. Are we headed for gridlock? Are we headed for shutdown? Is it all just a fake? Are they getting along? Those are the people that want to see that. They're reporting, some of them. But trust me on this. It's easier to cover the plane that crashes than the one that lands. But I'll tell you right now the story that we told, and the story that not just Minnesota needs, but the country needs, is a bipartisan and a split government that came together in the good of the people and moved things forward for Minnesota. That's what we can do. So I say to you, Minnesota, the state of our state is strong. And we are at a crossroads. We can choose to follow the same story that was written ahead of time. We can choose to decide who belongs and who doesn't. We can choose to let ideology drive us before people, or we can do what Minnesota's always done. Rise up and create a better way of life. Lead the nation in how things could get done. Making sure that all of our children, black, white, brown, indigenous, rural, urban, suburban, gets the opportunity to live what is truly a unique and incredible lifestyle of Minnesota. So here's my charge to you, and I walk hand in hand with you. Let's write our own story. Let's write a new story how this can end. Let's do this in a way that others can look at and say, that's the way out of this. And let's do it because Minnesotans, we've always done it before. We've never feared the future. We create the future. Let's go write the story. Thank you. Thanks, sister. Step up here. What do you think? Can we just walk out of here? I'm not sure. How do you drive? Good job, man. All right. We go out with them? Thank you. Thank you.
I call on Senator Gazelka.
Madam Speaker, I move that the joint convention do now adjourn.
Senator Gazelka moves that the joint convention do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. The motion prevails, and I declare the joint convention adjourned.
Yeah. We got to.
The House will come to order. I call on the member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Madam Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Winkler moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. No. The motion prevails, and the House stands adjourned until 3:30 p.m. Thursday, April 4th, 2019.